Welcome to Explore, Explain. This is a long-form video and podcast series sharing conversations with data visualization designers and developers from around the world. Each episode explores the detailed hidden thinking behind a single project or a series of related works to explain the what, the why, and the how of the design process. There are some wonderful guests and some wonderful projects to learn about. So let's jump in to today's episode with your host, Andy Kirk.
Hello and welcome to Explore, Explain. In this final special 9th episode of Season 3, I am delighted to welcome my friend, Francis Gagnon. Francis, it's great to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm very good, and I'm very happy to be here. No, truly, I'm very honored to be your 27th favorite person.
27th favorite person. and that's because a few other people cancelled as well. So yes, I mean it's very nice of you to say so. And in this very special final episode of Season 3, we're going to take a little bit of a different track, go down a different route for the normal conversations, which typically involve looking at a project of Data Viz work. We're now going to look at a project of developing a company, and specifically the company that you've been growing and cultivating and succeeding with over the last few years. So just for listeners and viewers, Francis, can you just give a little bit of background to Voila, what it is, what you do, and then we'll go into the details thereafter.
Yep, Voila is an information design firm focused on sustainable development and based in Montreal. We exist since 2013, and there are now 9 of us.
9, wow. That's even more than when we first started talking about this this conversation, which I think is testament as well to the success that you've had, which we'll come on to. To begin with, though, let's talk about the backstory of you and preceding 2013. I mean, how did you get into Data Viz / information design? And of course, we will bounce between terms, info design, Data Viz, and that's fine. But what's your sort of route into this field in the first instance?
I would say I've always been interested in design, but graphic design, but I was also interested in the analysis, in the substance, if you will, and I didn't see enough of this in graphic design, so it's always stayed like a side interest for me. And so, you know, I was doing the layout of the student newspaper, for instance, these kind of like design tasks that I would have learned myself. I was subscribing to a magazine about design where they were explaining the basic principles, and I was teaching myself these things, but always like as an aside. And then in I was preparing trainings, and of course on PowerPoint and all. And so I probably Googled something like "I hate PowerPoint," and that's how I found "PowerPoint is Evil" by Edward Tufte.
Yes.
And so then I was like, who's this guy? I started reading this thing, and I discovered information design as a field, that it was possible to bring those two interests that I had as one. So that was probably around, I would say 2005, like this. And so I just started, like, I know it clicked right away. I was like, yes, a visual explanation of something. Yes, clarity into it. And so I was very taken by this field. And, but I continued my career without doing information design full time. And then, yeah, the moment where I kept teaching myself those things, and I was also always doing it on the side during my job. And if I had a graph to do, I would over polish it, overthink it, and all. And then I finally got like a job in this field when I was working at the World Bank Group. I once showed I went to this meeting where people were presenting on PowerPoint their work. Basically, it was an internal meeting, annual strategy. So where are we spending, how much, what kind of results are we doing? It was awful. It was awful. It lasted like 2 times 3 hours from 7 to 10 in the morning, because it was across time zones and I was in DC. And I was fuming in the back, and I was just redesigning the whole thing in my head. And I remember also going around to my colleagues after those 6 hours of meeting, and I said, like, can you tell me one thing that you remember from those meetings? And out of those 5 colleagues, I got 4 nothings, and one who said, we have a lot of energy projects in a lot of countries. And I thought, well, 6 hours of meeting.
Wow.
So if all of us were just watching this
Yeah.
thing saying, I don't get it, I don't get it, you know, and it was really like an emperor's new clothes kind of
Yes.
situation
Yeah.
where no one wants to say like, I think the emperor is naked. And so I redesigned this, and at some point I went to show it to a higher up saying like, this would be so much more clear. And she grabbed me by the collar and said, you're going to do this now full time. And this is how I got my first full-time assignment in information design, redesigning management reports.
Fantastic. So you kind of caused that, you motivated that creation of a role, which is
Oh, yeah.
terrific. And
yeah, it was like a special assignment. They call it a developmental assignment. So they take you out of your job for 2 years to do a special project, and then you're supposed to go back into your job after this.
Now,
but yes, it was created for this.
At that point, are you already thinking further down the line? I want to do this myself, or do this as a full-time job maybe elsewhere, or were you just so kind of, I guess, perhaps excited at the prospect of doing this for the immediate term?
I don't know. I know that I didn't want to go back into my old job.
Of course,
after
yeah.
this. But I think I wanted to really experiment and know if I really like this. And I remember a moment where I had this colleague who was very blunt, and I loved her for it. And I told her like, so I'm leaving my job now. I'm going to be redesigning management reports. And she said, that sounds boring. and I still remember to this day the feeling of joy that her comment elicited in me. And this sort of moment of clarity of like, I do not care.
Yeah.
I am happy in my little corner of the world, redesigning management reports and doing those graphs. And I have no longer any need for external validation. And in the past, in my previous jobs, if I explained something, I wanted people to say, ooh, that sounds important. That sounds exciting. And I was like, yes, it's important and exciting. Thank you for recognizing it. But at this point, like, it sounds boring. Like, yeah, put me in the basement with like Excel or whatever, and with the data, and I'm going to be so happy. And so I think I knew it already that I would have fun in this, and it did happen. But I think it probably, I remember like arriving toward the end of those 2 years and having like, family discussions as well. Like, okay, what does that mean? Are we staying in the city? Is this movement? And it just so happened that it was the end of a contract for my partner too. My oldest daughter was going to enter kindergarten. It was really like a convergence of factors that said, okay, now is the time.
And I think there's something interesting there. I probably had a very similar arrival, but this time through Stephen Few as the author that kind of awoken my instincts. And I think it's interesting that many of us perhaps have had that, I don't know, maybe a design instinct or a design eye, and dabbled and had a certain degree of passion, not necessarily been trained as a designer, but similarly that we've seen these authors talk about, design concepts like clarity, like layout, like function, but in the context of data and stats and graphics. And, I'm delighted that you sort of talked about that kind of eureka moment. It very much happened to me as well. I'm sure many other people out there as well. And I do wonder, if we think about the legacy of people like Stephen Few and Edward Tufte, really important authors down the years, I wonder what the entry point is for a lot of people now, because in a sense, they were such provocative books and arguments raised in those books that kind of force you to pick a team, force you to sort of find, yes, I agree PowerPoint is evil, or I agree pie charts are evil. And even if they don't survive as a rule in real life forever, I do wonder if those moments of kind of contention sort of do bring people in.
Well, I've never seen like what inspired me from Edward Tufte was never his specific teachings about pie charts and data to ink ratio or any of this. To me, it's more like philosopher of information design. I approach it as to why are we even doing it?
Right.
What are we doing when we're doing? And so like the data to ink ratio and the pie charts and all those things are just like ways that he interpret this, but it always brings me back to the what and why, you know, when I read him, and I find that, okay, it's like more like a long goal, like this is where we're going. And so I definitely come from the let's say Clarity school of thought of information design as well. And I delight in understanding the moment where you understand something, and I love to share this. It's like, oh, I get it now, you know. And there's a bit of this in the name Voila too, you know. And
of course, yeah.
And so to me, I see him as more and I see Tufte especially as maybe a more neutral figure than many people see him.
Yeah.
Stephen Few, I find a bit more polarizing from my perspective, because he seems to have a very definite answer as to what is the line width on a bar chart, you know. And this is like, he studied it inside and out, and perception is like this and all. And you know, I do think, like Amanda Cox was saying, that if everything was a bar chart, the world would be quite a sad place and all. So, but I delight in what Stephen does in his level of obsession with details. Like I open his books to this day to say, like, what is the ideal line width, you know? And I go into the details, and he does those things. Like I find his book to be like reference books. Like I don't necessarily read them cover to cover, but I definitely go to them for those things. So, and to go back to your question, where's the entry point? I think the media now has pushed way more. I was meeting with a potential client this week, and they said, oh yes, I follow the New York Times, and they have such beautiful visualizations. And I mean, it's a client in Montreal, like, you know, there's even this impact all the way to us. So I think that, you know, compared to 2005, for instance, there is way more exposure to good data visualization now, and people can realize that, ooh, there is actually a field there. I mean, I think it's still microscopic how much people realize, but I think you don't need, like in the past, to, you know, end up on the website of a obscure Yale professor who was upset at PowerPoint at some point. Now it's kind of coming more to you if you pay attention.
That's right. And I think you're right. I think the role that both Steve and Edward Tufte have played is almost as disruptors to kind of cause us to think, oh yeah, why do we do those things? Why do we continue with these as you demonstrated before, these kind of ineffective methods? So I think even on that level, it is such a valuable contribution that they've made. Now, again, up until we launched the company with more than just yourself working there, you had a spell, I guess, as a freelancer. Would that be fair? Were you kind of working independently? And what was your experience as an independent? And is it something that you find quite natural to work alone? I mean, I certainly do enjoy working alone. It's not that I'm an unfriendly person. Others may judge that differently, but I quite enjoy that sense of being independent and my own boss. But how did you find that kind of experience?
It was very positive for me. I also enjoy. I worked from home. You know, when people went to work from home, for me, I had done it for like 6 years before, and I had enjoyed it. Of course, you know, there's always the pleasure of complete control over thing, but like with great control comes great responsibilities as well, and great workload. So that's of course the downside of having to do everything, but. I think it was very formative years for me to have to do everything, and especially to have to manage a team that does it further. You know, I know the pains of invoicing. I know the pains of doing footnotes in design. I know the pains of convincing Excel to put an average line on the bar chart, and you know, these kind of things. So I know the pains of everything because I've done it for almost 6 years before, but it was very pleasant and rewarding. I would say I remember it also as being, maybe it continues now, but like always a reach, like a stretch, like, okay, sure, I can do this. Oh my God, what am I going to do now? You know? So until I have it and finish, like, oh, I've done it. I have done it, you know? And so, and the client says, good work. I said, yeah, as usual. You know? But me, I'm like,
never in doubt. I think you're right.
So,
you don't ever really. You may have a vision of what something looks like, and you may have a sense of how it might play out as an experience. But I think you're right. You do have a sense of it's not that you're acting or performing some role, but you are there to try and reassure them that I've got this. But then behind the scenes, there is that struggle of, will there be something good that emerges from this? There could be something. There could be nothing to say. There could be no compelling visual treatment that really excites them as much as they seem to want it to excite them. So I do get that struggle. And even if you've done one project or 10 projects, number 11 is still, it's still a bit of a venture into the dark.
I read something interesting once about this. I don't have the source, but it said, your client is entitled to good work, but not necessarily to great work, which happens every now and then. You just catch lightning in a bottle, and it's great. And so sometimes we do, sometimes it's great, and we just have this brilliant idea and all. But I cannot, every time I take a contract alone or as a team, promise that it's going to be genius, and so clever and all. But of course, they're entitled to good work, and we put our minds to it, and we do something that is aligned with their objectives. So I would say this kind of thinking, like, sort of gives me a bit more space, if you will, like less stress, less pressure and all, and say, like, I know what I'm doing. I've done this before, and I can definitely do something good, but it's possible it's not going to be great 10 out of 10.
And good can be good enough in many cases, I guess. Now, 2013, I think you said, the company started. Now, tell me what happened in your head that said, right, I need somebody else. What was the kind of trigger point you thought, right, let's look to expand this? And was it simply that you needed somebody else to fulfill something, or was it this vision, right, I think I would like to set up a company doing this?
It's always been the vision.
Right.
Even before I launched it, this is one of the reasons it's not named after me also. And in my vision, I had to build this thing separate from me, and that can exist eventually even without me. And so I came to Montreal from Washington to create this company. I did not hire right away because I just needed to create it. I needed to think of creating a website. I was creating training material. I was executing on my first contracts and all. And to get a bit personal, after 1 year, I was getting ready to hire and maybe grow. And then some stuff happened in my personal life that just delayed all of this way more than I anticipated. So it took me actually almost 6 years. But so after those events, I came back, and I tended to just get into let's say a cycle. I was getting more and more work. I was too busy to start a company, basically. I have this image that I share sometimes, that I wanted to open a restaurant, but every day I was selling hot dogs on the street corner.
Right.
And so no time to I had to close the hot dog stand and, develop a menu, find a place and all those things. So I was just too busy to do it. And so, but it's always been the idea. I would say that why did it happen after 5.5 years is when I did it. It's hard to say. There's something about critical mass of time and motivation and frustration for not doing it.
Right.
Where I would say my biggest move was to say no to work.
Right.
Okay, I need the time. I acknowledge now that it's impossible to start a company when I'm already working 10 hours a day. And there's always I was just too lazy this week. I had time between 11 and 1 a.m., to do this thing, and just acknowledge that I have to do this. So enough frustration to get there. And I think there wasn't really something that happened at that point.
And before you did undertake your first hire, were you working with collaborators already? So although they weren't officially under your company header, were you already kind of engaged in kind of project work and collaborating with other skill sets, I guess, that gave you that sense of it isn't always just something that you have to work on alone. You know how to run these things as a team.
Yeah, I had one collaborator who is an old friend of mine that I have known at this point for 15, 20 years.
Mhm.
And we gave trainings at the same place, and he would attend my trainings and he would really get it. And he started actually, he asked me to give the training himself, and so he
Okay.
had clients. And so I, I structured the presentation. I trained him so that he could do it, and he started just finding his own client and delivering the training. And sometimes he would also find a client that would want us to execute something for them, and then we would work together. This was very rewarding. I loved
Right.
working with him on those things. It did not really give me an impression that I could manage someone or anything.
Uh-huh.
It was really equals
Yeah.
working together under the company umbrella. And then in what happened, I decided, I think like in March 2019, that this was the time. And in April or May, I went to give a talk at an engineering school in Montreal. And someone came to me after and said, like, do you take interns? And I said, yes.
Of course I do.
And I thought, like, this person wanted 6 weeks with me.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is great. Now I need an office. I need a place for this person. This is post-pandemic, pre-pandemic. And so everyone, if you work, you go to the office. And I need an office. It's just 6 weeks. It's getting me out of my comfort zone. I have said yes now. It needs to happen. I need to think of, how do I manage this person? Like, how do I delegate and all, and forced me already. And so this person arrived in the summer. And while she was there, I started hiring as well, like the recruitment process and
Okay.
advertising position and all. And then in early August, the first employee joined with the intern, who came for 6 weeks and stayed for a year, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I say intern. Her title was consultant because she was paid, like,
Yes.
she was like, she had a normal salary with us.
Yeah.
The intern aspect is more that she was finishing school and it was a short-term kind of
course.
thing. And then she just kept staying, if you will, had more work, and like, and we would say like, oh, she would say like, I think I can stay another 2 months. And I said, yes, you're welcome. It's great. And all. So this is, she gave me sort of that like smaller step in
Yeah.
the beginning to force me in a small commitment, but still sort of momentum, like it's happening now.
So I wonder, in terms of sliding doors moments, had she not come to you at that point in time, given, as you said, how the pandemic was around the corner, you could arguably still be sat there now waiting for the moment to do you think?
I don't think so, though, because I was really, it did, like, I remember in March making that decision and saying it's happening.
Okay.
And also one of my clients, anyway, I had to go to a cool-off period to convert from a consultant to a vendor, like to
okay, right.
And so I had told them July 1st is the beginning of my cooling off period. So I cannot take contracts.
Okay.
So I had committed to this. Yeah, but I mean, of course, it would have changed things a little if she didn't. But the momentum was there. Like, I had made my decision. I had started to align my dominoes for this to happen, and it would have happened.
And just thinking about the context of Montreal and Canada in general, I mean, what was, I don't know, the data viz marketplace or the information design marketplace then? I mean, did you feel perhaps, for example, that there weren't many others doing it, so that this is a good place to be? Or do you feel that there is such a good market out there, and still is, to warrant growing and developing a kind of wider basis of colleagues?
When I arrived here, there was like a few practitioners, and there was a firm as well that was called Function, F Function, as well, by Sébastien Pierre and Audrey Lapierre. And ironically, we worked in the same building. I was renting in a co-working space, and they were a few floors down, I think. But the first time that we met was in New York at the conference at the New York Times, actually. And that's how we connected. And then with them and a few other locals in Montreal, like Christophe Billot, Chris is well known in the D3 community, especially, and Nicolas Couchten, who is on Plotly. He was their chief technical officer. I'm not sure I have the right, but he was an executive there. I don't think at the time, but he was a practitioner. And we created the Visualisation Montréal, Visualization Montreal, to gather those people together,
okay.
to have
Yeah.
conversations, to talk about it. So, you know, when I arrived, no, there was not a lot of action outside of this. There was no Visualisation Montréal, and so we created this. But part of my goal was to nourish this community here as well. This is why, you know, I was part of this committee that created the Visualisation Montréal. This is why, I mean, obviously I wanted to create the team, create the company in Montreal because I am from Quebec, not from the big city, but from Quebec. But also I was excited about creating this other pole, you know, of like other place that could become known. Like, of course, everyone thinks of places like New York or London and the Bay and Silicon Valley, maybe for those kind of things. And you know, honestly, I'm really tired of seeing maps of Manhattan and everyone is testing whatever their maps, the 3D maps, the color maps and all.
Or the grid of San Francisco,
Yeah, or exactly. And so I wanted to like diversify this a bit and create it more in Montreal. So beyond what Voila does, to really like make people in Montreal feel like this is a field I could enter. Like me, it took me so much time to come across information design, and I wanted people to do it. And in fact, it's one of the mandates that Voila has now, which is education to information design. So we do those trainings. This is where it falls, but I keep talking about it. And
and I think it's important to recognize that it's not that the appetite amongst organizations doesn't exist for information design, data viz, consultancy or design work or trainings. I think often, up until recent times especially, it's just been a lack of awareness perhaps of even what to search for. You know, what do I even type into Google to look for this kind of stuff, whether it's, you know, infographics help or something like that. But I do think that, going back to your point you made about the recent client that mentioned that they'd seen New York Times graphics, I think this greater visibility of the work that comes from this field now creates a marketplace, or at least a recognition of terminologies that allows clients to know what to look for when it is that they're coming towards us. And going back to, you know, information design versus data viz, I think even those challenges for us as a company or independent company owners, it's hard to know sometimes what terminology to use to get that kind of searching.
Yeah, from the clients, but also on the recruitment side, and I'll go back to this later. But there is immense needs for information design and little demand in proportion for what it is. It's like all the towers downtown, wherever you live, are making PowerPoints like right now that are absolutely impossible to engage with. And they're doing those reports and those dashboards with bad graphs and all. It's like, and they don't realize it because this is the only thing that they've ever seen. And, you know, they just keep on practicing without learning it. And I am very optimistic that this market is going to gradually open. I see the value added of information design. This is not this is not phony. This is not a fluke. This is a real value added. It really makes a difference. And so it's just a matter of time as people discover it and realize that it makes a difference before the market like starts to grow and grow and grow. I'm not worried about it.
And going back to the initial intern that you brought on board, and then the initial recruiting, and you don't, and please do not go into any specifics about individuals, but I'm curious about the talents that you were seeking to bring on board. And was that perhaps, I want another Francis to work with me, or was it I want somebody who's not Francis, who can bring different skills and different lens to the challenges that I'm facing, so that we've got an all, you know, maybe a broader base of capability?
Yeah, this is a very good question, and it was a very good question to myself for a long time, and I think it explains parts of the delays as well, because I was like, I don't know where to start. And I don't know anyone else who does what I do, even in
Right.
Montreal, like the way that I do. And, you know, Function actually has closed since then, and our people were employed elsewhere. And my specific brand of information design, which is like, was very focused on reports and getting their data visualization right. And I'm not a coder or any of those things. So the decision that I made was more like, what can I delegate that can save me time and be done better than I do. And so this is why I hired a graphic designer. As I said, I always learned it on the side. I've always had an interest, but I am not a graphic designer by training. And graphic design also is quite time consuming.
Yes.
You know, if you do a 200-page report, you're going to click a lot to place all of those paragraphs and graphs.
There's a lot of nudging.
So,
yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of time. So, and I call that clicking and clicking. And so I thought, like, this is great. I can hire someone who's going to improve this work and actually spare a lot of my time actually by doing it. So this is how I settled on a graphic designer too. And it makes me realize also in your answer and your question about what was the moment where I decided to, like, it was time to have a team. I think part of this reaching this critical mass also was maybe more vision in the future for myself. Like, I could see what I was doing there, and I was like, okay, what if I'm in my mid-50s and I solicit like a client to say, yes, I can do the layout of your report, I'm gonna do your graphs, I take care of everything. And I didn't think that I would have the energy at that point, you know, to do that kind of work. I could just feel like and also the motivation at some point. You know, I really reached a point where I was like, okay, I got the contract. Shit.
I've got to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I got to do it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh shit, I got to do it, you know? And I thought, this is no good. You know, I could feel in a way in myself, like the limit being reached of the motivation for this phase of my life of executing absolutely everything. If the printer is stuck, it's me, you know. If the invoice is not paid, it's me. If InDesign crashes, it's me, everything. And so I would also say that I always had a vision for information design that is much larger than what I can do. You know, I cannot execute on what I think information design should be. I can guide a team, and I feel that this is my brand of information design. You know, there are people who have like a very strong brand. They are like data humanism and, you know, hand-drawn stuff, and others are like hardcore coders, or they're deep into the statistics behind it. And this is why, like, and this is maybe a word for to people who want to enter the field, but you do not have to be a unicorn. You shouldn't be a unicorn. Of course, there are a few of us like this, but you have to find what clicks for you in there. And, you know, Mike Bostock doesn't draw, as far as I can tell, but he's a hero of data visualization. And as far as I can tell, Georgia Lupi doesn't code either, but she's another hero. And those two people, you know, I found their niche. They're not like, oh, I need to learn to code now. I need to learn this. And so for me, I said, like, this is as far as I'm going to go learning technology. I think now my role is really more to assemble a team and to do information design. Voila is my tool, if you will, to do information design, assembling people who can do it and putting collaborative. But I think I've strayed a bit from your question.
I think it's really important observation, because I think part of it is both recognizing what you are not good at and being honest about that, recognizing what you cannot become. I mean, likewise, I will not become, at this point in my life, an advanced, capable programmer. I might be able to understand what it's possible to do in those libraries and languages, but I don't now want to invest learning the syntax, and I'm okay with that. And so, as you said, in data viz, there can be this drift towards thinking you have to be everything. And actually, a side note, which perhaps gives us a bridge to talk about, you know, kind of recruiting and stuff, which is, I often see people advertising data viz jobs, whether it's like a newspaper or a newsroom, And I often feel that the people looking at those adverts might be thinking, oh, what a great job that would be if I could do all these things. And everybody who ever gives me the heads up to say there's an advert, would you mind, sharing it onwards? They're always saying, and please, would you pass on some kind of message to say, we don't need everything, but maybe just some of these things, and we'll develop you. And I guess going back to your growth, from 1U to 9 as you are now,
Yeah.
I mean, I assume that along the way you've had to both envisage the repertoire of skills that you want on your roster at some point, but also just look at individuals on their own merits and think, right, I can take your brilliant skills already, but then maybe craft them and mold them into something that also aligns with what I'm seeking.
Yeah. The information design side of things, the team is 9 of us right now. And so we have 3 information designers and 3 graphic designers. And so the rest is in project management, if you will. And the information design side is definitely a challenge to hire. And what I observe in the market is a lot of data viz practitioners and very few data viz learners.
Okay.
So a lot of people who apply look a lot like our clients, like they've been doing like pie charts and line charts and bar charts in Excel for years and years, but you suspect they've never opened a book about it, or read an article, or they don't follow the thing. So it's great, but this is our market. This is the whole point why we exist, because people do not learn it, actually. They just keep doing it. It's the same thing in my training. I'm sure you have those people too, and they're like, oh yeah, I've been like doing data visualization for years. And they're like, what? The pie chart has those downsides? I've never thought about it, And so,
yeah.
So like, definitely, like one question that we ask, for instance, is like, who do you follow? Who do you admire in data visualization? And this is a big tell, actually, whether they're following, whether they're reading or anything. Like it doesn't have to be like we're not looking for certain names, but we're looking for like this universe, like name someone in there that obviously says that those people, well, it doesn't have to be Tufti or any of those like old school people, but I don't know, if you're on social media, you're going to know Alberto Cairo right away. He's read a lot of books. He's a big connector and all those things. I'm not saying Alberto is the right answer. I'm just saying, if you like peek just a little, there are names that come to you.
Yeah.
And so this is like always a very good sign for us when people start to name people that, are in the field and obviously practitioners. And it's okay if they name someone that we don't know. We can research them and realize, oh, actually they are doing something. But often you realize that, people are just in a job where they love the data visualization or they're responsible for it and they've been practicing it a lot of time, but they haven't really been like elevating their work, to what we have to deliver as Voila. We cannot do the same thing as the clients. So I agree with you that I think we're trying to be very clear in our hiring process that we're not looking for the full package. And we're also in a way trying not to write too much about it and say, here are 20 things that we want you to know and all the technologies and these kind of things. We're trying to be very precise about what is really what we're going to need with us. But yeah, everyone has been trained inside of Voila, and by each other as well, and just sharing resources. And they teach me too, like, I read this thing that they came across, or they have this idea, or they consult someone outside, and we all learn together. So there is a lot of training at Voila.
So and not to put words in your mouth, but it strikes me that people need to be curious about the subject and about developing, but also curious as a trait that makes you a good data viz / info design person anyway, to be able to take a data set and explore it and dive into it and ask questions about it and hit blind alleys and then go again with a new avenue. Therefore, again, just in general terms, do you tend to find that you are recruiting fresh graduates or more experienced hires, or isn't there a typical kind of persona.
Hiring at Voila is complicated by one thing, is that everyone needs to be bilingual, French and
Of
English.
course, yeah.
So there is a lot of talent out there, some of which has applied to Voila, but if you don't speak French, it's very hard. Like some of our clients are French, but also our internal proceedings are all in French. And in
Okay.
fact, we're not affected yet by it, but in Quebec, there are regulations that say that companies need to provide everything in French. And so if like there are 9 of us, if the 10th person doesn't speak French, we cannot all switch to English. In fact, some of us cannot spend their whole day in English as well. So this is, I would say, a big challenge that brings the pool much smaller. And then there is the challenge that information design is not really taught as such to undergrads, like as a job, like an accounting job, where you come out of it like knowing the technical skills. There's the challenge that few people know that it exists as well. There is the challenge that people do not necessarily learn it, as I said, they practice it. And so we have a lot of people who apply and they have this big portfolio. Again, looks like our clients, it doesn't look like what we are bringing to it. But often we're just looking for this spark as well. Like you can tell the potential of someone, and you can tell that they have taste, and they have like a certain vision, and they have the mindset. I like to say that information design is a personality trait.
Yeah.
It's a way of thinking. It's a way of like, you have those visions. And I remember being with a colleague in Washington, and she was explaining the data that she was following and how she wanted to measure it and all. And as she was talking, I was drawing and I showed it to her and she said like, "Oh, it's magic." I said, "No, you just described it to me." You know, it's so natural. Like I can't, it's obvious to me. This was also a moment where I thought like, "Oh, maybe I should really do this." Like I realized not everyone has these images in their head as you go. So you're looking for those people who have those visual instincts, if you will, who have this hunger for clarity at the same time, who love understanding and explaining things. And even if they're not like fully there, I tell people sometimes, like, obviously you are an information designer, like, you have what it takes to do it. Like you can keep developing for this, but
they just don't realize it.
Yeah, they don't exactly. They don't realize it. I mean, I was probably an information designer myself before becoming one, and that's why I had this graphic design interest and all, but it was never like shown to me. And it's like when I give trainings. If I go into an organization and they have like 25 people who participate to the training, I always tell them, out of this training, you shouldn't ask 25 people to do the same thing. You should, if you really want to have an impact internally, you should find the 2 people for whom that really clicked. And like, oh my God, yes, that works. And then give them responsibilities and reward them for this and ask them to help their colleagues and all. Like it's almost like this. The main purpose of going to give a training is to find this radar and beep, ooh, you have one here, like, and give them more responsibility. So in recruitment, we also have this beep, beep, where we're looking for people like this, and yes, developing them, but developing with them as well.
Of course. And I wondered, again, from your point of view, your own growth in the last few years as now the head of this pyramid, this organization. There's a lot of responsibilities comes with that, I guess. You've got to keep the revenue coming in, you've got to keep everyone's employment viable. And I guess there's also an extended, ever more so than before, a responsible, I don't know, to have this sort of pastoral role, to be looking after them as people. The whole issue around well-being and people's work-life balance has never been more important than over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, just in broad terms, can you just sort of speak to how you've grown yourself as this sort of leader and this manager and doer in this sort of pyramid, or this triangle, sorry? Yeah,
it's a very good point. The challenge of the entrepreneur is to match the supply with the demand. You're sort of in the middle of this thing with the challenges on both sides. Like you have to find the demand, you have to find the right demand as well. You have to find the right supply on the other side. And as you said, the supply, if you
Mm.
will, which is me and the team,
Mm.
they have their own priorities, their own preferences, their own skills, their own needs,
Yeah.
and so you need to deal with this. And on the other side, you have the clients who have their own expectations, their own resources, and so you cannot. I always say there's a cost on both sides. Like, sometimes you do like this big project that really pays well, but you run your staff to the ground to it, and someone finishes working at 4 a.m. and no, this was too costly a project. I cannot, like, this is not a good match of the demand and the supply. I need to keep the supply. And I hope people are not offended that I call this the supply, but it's really
Yes, of
like
course.
where we supply this product or the service of information design. You need to keep it working. You need to keep it happy. And there is like, and as I said, I am one of the supply as well too, because I do information design and I participate with the teams, and so then there is the demand. And right now I feel that what we're going through is this moment of work-life balance reaching the point where it's affecting the level of service that people receive. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but here we have discussions about restaurants struggling to stay open, or certain fields want to close 1 or 2 days a week because their staff, they're incapable of staffing.
Yeah.
Or you wait for an hour before you speak to someone at your bank and all. Well, this is all the same system. This is all people who say like, I don't want to work on Saturday night. I want to go to a restaurant. Well, if you're the person who works at a restaurant, it creates a problem, if you will. So it heightens, if you will, this challenge.
And it's always in flux. I guess it's always, there's always new tensions and new gravitational pulls on both sides.
Constantly. And so, but you have to manage the expectations of the client on the level of service as well. How fast can you do this? At what level? How many revisions can you do on something until it's really perfect for them? And manage on the other side with the team, like, well, maybe this one needs to push a little more as well, or this one is good enough. And you cannot just say, I'm just going to look on one side. I'm going to tell my staff, do not worry, I'm giving you 3 months to do this. Wait until the inspiration strikes you. And thankfully the staff doesn't ask for these kind of things. And I cannot tell the client, sure, give us 2 days, your report is done, and like on the other side. You have to constantly find this balance. And I think it's a good point that it's in flux. It changes. Like the expectation can change client to client and staff to staff as well, but it's always like finding a way to match this.
I recall a previous episode, I think it was in this season, with Thomas Claver from Claver Franca, and he spoke about a rubric that they have when it comes to their projects that they work on, the projects that they pitch for, and the projects that they accept, which was fun, budget, and capacity. 3 things, and 2 of those have to be present. So you can do something that's fun, and maybe in a very broad sense, fun could be it's got a certain cachet through the client, and it might pay well. And ideally, of course, you'd have the capacity to deliver, but you might be able to sort of sacrifice one of those things, but not 2. And I'm wondering, from what you've described there, whether there's a similar kind of implied balancing act that you're trying to find as well.
Yeah, we don't have this framework really, but it makes sense with what we do. Of course, I would think for us, fun is not a factor. No, I'm kidding. But fun is more the, we work in sustainable development. So, it has to be related to this. Of course, So if a client, if it's not in the field, so it greatly reduces the chances that we're going to take it on. We need to have a lot of capacity, and they need to have a lot of budget. But even then, there are limits that we're not like going to go beyond. And then I would say that yeah, the budget and capacity are things that as an entrepreneur you're constantly like dealing with, and it's the same. Like the client wants to pay as little as possible, and the staff wants to be paid as much as
Of
possible,
course,
which is
yeah.
normal, you know, on those sides, and you're in between those things. So the budget is always delicate. I would say though that the hardest thing, and we haven't cracked it, is managing capacity. We're always overworked. We're like always, there's always a part of Voila that stays late, you know,
Right,
whatever like we do, and we always, I find that, you know, it's been like a year or two that we have those conversations as to, well, that was a big rush, and well, there's another rush, and and we keep hiring, indeed, you know, as you know, and yet, you know, it doesn't really fix it. So we're really in thinking like what needs to happen to find really this balance. I think I'm also personally a bit overexposed to this,
Yeah.
because I'm always a company, whatever portion of the company is in a rush. So I'm in a way exposed to it. It doesn't mean that I'm the one who finishes at midnight always.
Of course,
you know?
yeah.
It can be someone else who does it. So I'm not saying it's the same burden for me, but I always see it, and it's something that always fascinated me about entrepreneurship in general. It's like I would go to a restaurant and order the salmon, and they would give me the salmon. I would be like, how did you know that I would come here and order salmon? Like,
Yeah.
why, how did you buy the salmon fresh for me for
Yeah.
today? Like, what if I tripped and did not come? What would have happened to that salmon? You know, I'm kind of puzzled as to how they do this. And yet it just works. I don't know how they do it
Yeah.
to order my salmon. Well, sometimes they tell you that we're out of salmon because Francis was here, so you cannot have our last salmon. But it's this magic that I need to make happen now in Voila, of like the client comes and says like, I want to do this interactive. I'm like, yes, we're available and we have the resource. How do I make that happen, you know, to be available just at the right time with the right resource? So it's almost impossible to have like a good central planning that says
Yes.
like, you're gonna have those 3 months just for this project, and it's gonna deliver. Plus, you know, in the middle of production, the client's gonna delay stuff, change stuff, like as much as we plan things, and we have mechanism to sort of align the client with the production, but you know, the client has its own imperatives and its own like movement as well that they have to deal with.
I mean, what you spoke about there seems to chime with what you spoke about before when you were individual doing this and saying, yeah, no problem. And then, oh, crikey, I have to do this now. I therefore wonder, I mean, there's 2 points to this question, which is, do you need to say no to more things? Or actually, do you not want to be in a situation where you have to say no, and actually you'll find a way to allow yourself to keep saying yes? And with that, do you therefore still have the capacity internally to do, I don't know, passion projects and to do the kind of development and training and just general step back from the noise of delivering, so that we can all write blog posts and process pieces? And, you know, do you think that stuff is still very important to keep going?
It's very hard to keep that time aside, and to an extent also it comes down to personal, gosh, it's hard. Some staff manage to do it, let me put it this way, and we do, as I said, it's not the whole company who's always like in a rush, and so it depends. Sometimes it's the turn of someone else who's like, oh my god, they're working nights on this thing, and someone else is going to be like a bit like slower, or you just squeeze it, you know, into your time. This is not to say that it falls entirely on the individual responsibility, but there is a part of the solution that is there. My goal every time I hire is to free up this time. It's very hard to make it happen. One solution sometimes is to hire ahead of the demand, you know, to hire before it's going to be there. And we have done this. So we hired our first project manager, which, well, we call it project manager, but it's not how it's understood in Silicon Valley and all. It's more like someone who's going to manage clients and the files and the timelines, and also that the
director.
Exactly. And so it was only 3 of us. If it's only 3 of us, we don't need a 4th person to organize us. We can just talk to each other. But I needed this person to be there before there were like 6 of us. And so this person could put the systems in place for those things, like install the software and also we hired a bit ahead of time for this. Then when I hired a second graphic designer, we had 2 outstanding candidates and I said, let's go. We hired both of them at the same time. And so I knew that we were a bit ahead. Well, I thought like if I hired just one, we're going to be at capacity, sort of. I said, why not be a bit over capacity and finally do those things? And it's the same thing. Now we have a second person in project management or internal management, and this person is definitely coming at a time early to prepare us for more growth, like to have, like, by the time we're 15, it's going to be too late to have that person. She's going to write this, it has to be in place. And also we're setting up some stuff. So this is one of the solutions, but I would say it's also one of the challenges as an entrepreneur to know when to add supply, like when to add staff at the right time, because it can also be financially hazardous.
Of course. Yeah.
Add someone too early and you don't have the demand to match it and pay everyone, because as manager of the team, I'm always mindful of building something that is sustainable.
Yes.
That, like, you know, you have job security in a sense, like, you know, it's like, don't worry, I'm not like just going crazy and having to fire people like a year later because it was so. I tend to grow like at a pace where I trust that this person is going to be paid for and supplied for, and we can do it. But
well, I suppose something with that is growth on the surface is always more people, more projects, bigger premises, more money. How big is big enough? You know, when will this growth journey reach a point where you think, actually, that's probably enough now because we've got 1,000 staff suddenly, and this is no longer something that's kind of, I mean, I do, for example, I do know of other studios in DataViz that have chosen to downsize, not because of any perceived failure or drying up of projects, but they felt that the size had got too big for them to continue to enjoy the endeavor. So I wondered, you know, where you are now, clearly that there's a trajectory going forward, which is more people, but do you know what that will look like when you've reached the point of that's probably enough?
I would say 30 feet yacht. Once I can afford a 30 feet yacht,
right, with staff on the yacht, of course. Yeah,
exactly. But we work there. There is like I don't know when is enough, and there is a point of tension, but not tension, but there is a factor in there to me, is that I think that Voila does very good work. And not just in terms of quality, but as I said, we're trying to help people who have ideas to make the world better, to get it across. And this is where it comes from. You know, I was working in an environment where we were trying to, you know, save the environment and promote gender equality, and the communication was so bad. And I thought, this is crazy that those important ideas are not coming across. And I feel like this about our clients. Wow, this is really important, actually. People need to understand what you have to say. So to me personally, there is an incentive for growth to just help more people to do this. So there is like a the other thing about growth is that I do find it challenging right now, like at 9 of us. I am kind of curious if more growth is not going to bring, ironically, more balance to me, because the thing is going to, like, you know, there's anyway just 24 hours in the day. And, you know, if you're Tim Cook managing the largest company in the world, you still just have 24 hours anyway. And so my point is, you know, it's possible to delegate more. It's possible that the thing starts to work by itself and my responsibilities change. And honestly, I work very hard and long hours, but so did I when I was freelancing. You know? And I still remember like a 5-day stretch where I did not leave, and my girlfriend would bring me food, you know, and I would work like 12 to 16 hours every day just to finish that thing, you know. So In terms of workload, it's kind of, I don't see it as, oh, the more it grows, the more I have work, but it
Yeah.
reinvents itself. I would say one of the challenges of growth is that of collaboration.
Okay.
And you can imagine a network of 2 people. There's just one link, then
Mhm.
3. You have those 3 links, and
Mm.
then you have 8 people, and everyone is linked to each other and different. So I find that the more we grow, the more we have those challenges as well,
Yeah.
of like, how do we work together? Who's responsible for what? We have to clarify. And right now, we're even like moving into the space where not everyone is working on everything. Like, I'm not saying it's completely new, we've been doing this, but we're trying to become more disciplined about this. Like when a great project arrives, well, it's possible only those 2 people are going to work on it. Voila is collaborative by definition, because we have those, it's like, it's no one does anything alone at Voila, but it doesn't mean that everyone has to be on every project. So I would say this is something that, like, I definitely keep a close eye on.
Yeah. I guess you'll feel it when it happens. You'll feel it.
Yeah.
Right, there we are. Let's leave things there.
Yeah, it's and now I feel like and I was talking about the excessive workload also that sometimes people have, and then sometimes I think maybe you didn't have to be on that project. Maybe actually, like, part of the workload is like, we have to have a meeting to like, what are you doing? What am I doing? And so how come I cannot find your files? And I don't understand where you are and the steps and all. And so again, I don't envision people starting to work alone, but it does question. Every time you add someone, you add work as well. You add coordination work. So yeah, that is a concern related to the growth. As to go back to your question about what is the, I don't know, what is the ideal size? I kind of I see outfits in my field that are like 40 people, for instance. Is that too big? Can we do this in Montreal? With the constraints that we have. I also imagine like degrowth as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, maybe we're doing too much. Maybe this is like, we can be more picky about it, but we're not there yet. And my approach so far has been, you were asking, when do you turn down projects? I tend to have the philosophy that the company as a whole is never too busy. This is like, I have to nuance that, but we can hire, like you and I individually cannot add hours to our day to do most things, but the company can add hours to the day by hiring more people. So it's a question of seeing it coming, hiring in time to be able to do this. And so when I say, well, the company is never too busy, you would immediately see the source of why are we working too much. But it's matching it with more and more supply as well, more and more people to do it. So it's been, and my understanding, and I have a business mentor, and I read a bit about this, is that it's normal to have these slight moment of stretch as well. We're like, oh, okay, like we now too much work. I would say that where we could get better is to be faster, ready to hire.
Right.
To have like, just, okay, press the button, now it's published, and like, we're gonna have someone. But we can take, like, we're so busy at that point that we can take a month and a half just to publish the posting.
Now, one thing we've not spoken about, and I'm aware that we've gone already nearly an hour, so I wanted to just talk about projects that you worked on. You've talked about the kind of values that you're looking for in the kind of clients and the kind of work that entails. I mean, give me a sense of a typical project, or one that you reflect on that you felt was that is the quintessential of Voila projects that we worked on.
Okay, well, we have a lot of projects with the Canadian Climate Institute here in Canada, and there's a great synergy with them, because they do all this research about climate, and they want to get it across, and we are built for this. We have this information design and sustainable development expertise. So what I really like is to be able to integrate the different parts of their communication strategy, if you want. And so we can do for them their full report, the art direction, the graphic design, what is this going to look like, and the layout of the thing. And every single chart in there has been redesigned by us. And then we can do an infographic, for not an infographic, but an interactive for them as well. We can do a social media campaign by adapting the visuals that we have developed there, putting the title in the right size, etc. We can animate some of those things as well to draw the eyes to it. And one little thing that I absolutely love doing with our clients is the PowerPoint presentation, actually. And I still have a lot of qualms about PowerPoint, because you need to fight it to actually do the right thing, but it's a great tool. And it's kind of the point of the spear of a lot of communication strategy. Like the report is this thick, but people are going to go on a tour to talk to people about their resources and about their research, sorry. And the PowerPoint is the only thing that many of those people are going to see as well. And you cannot butch this thing, you know, the last mile in a way, or the last 5 meters from the screen to your audience. And so I love to work with them on their presentation as well. So I love to have something that's very integrated. I would say that our core product, in a way, is, because it comes from what I was doing as a freelancer, is really the report.
Yeah.
Like at the moment, the PDF report, but we have a few clients who have started doing the HTML report with responsive graphs. And, you know, I think there's a great future in there. But like if you go back to like the core of this, it starts with the report, but we do so many other things. We have done dashboards, we're coding stuff as well. And so that's the typical process.
And I think that certainly comes across that, you know, this isn't just charts as a service. This is the whole repertoire of clear communication that has some impact. And we don't need to get into the semantics of what impact or success looks like. But I think sometimes what I reflect on in terms of the changes to the data viz world over the last 10, 15 years is, I think it now is recognized as more than just a chart. It is this full repertoire of media types and media outputs and formats that's just part of the same challenge that we're not doing so well generally as society, communicating things. And so it's great that you've got that repertoire and you've got that capability across the board to deliver that stuff.
It also has downsides.
Yeah.
I just want to say, because for a small team of 9 to be able to develop across this,
of course,
it's very hard we're stretched in a way, you know. It's like we have just one person who can do that thing, and if this person is busy, then the whole company is not available, or if this person is on vacation. So I think this is a reflection that we have right now, like how much more can we do in terms of projects, and how much should we focus on something and get really, really, really good at it.
Interesting. And just to sort of bring things to a summary, I know that obviously we're now speaking in October 2022. We've both recently suffered from COVID for the first time. I mean, obviously the pandemic as a period that you've gone through as, you know, the leader of this organization, what would be your reflections of the challenges that you face and kind of coming out the other side of that? I mean, I know that you've discussed kind of offline that it's now time to find premises for you to bring everyone together. I mean, what are some of your headline reflections of this last 2.5 years?
Yeah, you know, Voila has grown under COVID, under confinement completely. I mean, there was the intern, as I said, the consultant who was with us in the beginning for a short time, but there was really only one staff and me when we confined in March 2020, and we went to 9 virtually. Like, you know, we've all grown this thing, and honestly, it's been thriving for us. I think we've been fairly good at integrating, at giving a sense of belonging, and you're in the team, and we communicate with you as well. You know, we should ask really the staff about how they feel about this, but I think we've been fairly good. And it's funny, but one thing that it really improved is video conferencing with international clients. It's like we used to have those awkward things. Everyone's in a room, you can barely see them. You don't hear them because they're speaking to a mic that's at the other end of the room. And of course, their camera shows you 3/4 of the floor, the ceiling, and some of them at the bottom. And I see it coming back now, you know, as people go to the office. And I sometimes suggest, I wouldn't say insist, but suggest again, that they just go back to their desk when they call us and they open their laptop and we have them like perfectly framed. So the collaboration with our clients has actually been improved by this because we are remote. We don't have local clients. It's been easier. Like we open a meeting with 20 people. Everyone is there in their little corner. And of course, because it's been 2.5 years, they have learned to frame themselves. They have to speak into the mic. They know where's the unmute button and these kind of things. So for a company that collaborates, not just collaborates internally, but that collaborates with clients who are not local, this has been a boon in a way. I would say, you know, there's the whole personal aspect also of being confined as well that we have to deal with. So we've had, I mean, for a while we couldn't meet at all, but we've had a few, and probably not enough, in-person activities as well, just to go celebrate, know each other, play bowling, and so and just because it's fun, you know. And we actually get along very well together. Like the team really gets along.
Well, that's really important.
When we meet, we don't talk about work, you know. And I've been in an environment in the past where this is all we have in common, you know. We have to say like, oh, this project is really oh yes, I know. But now there's not a mention of work. Actually, it's even awkward if someone talks about work because we have so many things to talk about. So yeah, but it's still something to manage with people and knowing that, you know, they can have their difficulties. There's the whole question of going to back to the office, you know, that's floating right now. And Voila staff is very contrarian on this. Like what I read on social media is always leave us alone. Now we're free and we want to work from home. And my staff is like, where's the office? We want an office. We've waited enough for an office. We want to go back to the office. And if anything, I'm the most reluctant. I am not. I want to have an office, but I'm less. I'm this bit of fear of commitment. Like, oh, you know, I have signed for 3 years for this thing. I don't know where the future is going to be. I don't know if we like this is another salary just for an office. And like I want it, but I'm more and it's so it's not the employer that's saying come back to the office. It's the employees who say give us an office for this. And I understand why, you know. It's they like to see each other and they love the spontaneity.
It's that belonging, I guess. You know, you belong. This is our place of work. This is the, you know, our color scheme on the walls and the big logo up there. This is, you know, this is where we belong. It's our badge.
Yeah, this is very much my thing. I find like I enjoy a lot creating Voila. And the physical environment to me is kind of the realization of this, coming to the office, seeing the logo on the door and the colors and the decor and these kind of things. I really like this. And we have plans about what are we going to print to put on the walls. And now in our work, now we have a good portfolio. We want to have this. How are we going to set it up? But yes, I mean, we are in the middle of looking for an office, like literally this week, talking to brokers about about our needs, about our budget, about our expectations. We had consultation internally as well, what our needs, what do we want. And again, as an entrepreneur, I have to balance, like,
of course,
you know, I want this like glass
penthouse,
office and penthouse and everything, and like all those things with the reality. And, you know, I don't think the team is exaggerating. I think like they have a sense, but what I mean is that in the end, I'm gonna have to choose the compromises, you know, as well as to, okay, where is this? Where are we gonna be? How big is it gonna be? What kind of facilities are we gonna have?
Absolutely. Well, it all sounds exciting. It all sounds as well, you know, beautifully convivial. It feels like a real team, like a real family. Not to get too cheesy, but just like a real family that you've got going there, which I think's ever so important for the success that you've had. I mean, I'm just wondering, just to close, do you have, I don't know, one nugget of advice or one, maybe to not just to other people, but to you yourself 3 years ago, if you were speaking to yourself now, you know, Francis, do this or don't do this, or, you know, your instinct about that thing, go with it. So it was good.
I would say that definitely, well, there is a survival bias in this, but 80% of success is showing up. And I did feel like, the clients, there was a bit of a build it and they will come with the clients as well. And, I think I was a bit concerned about this, and maybe I shouldn't have been as much. Maybe I
But
would.
it is a leap of faith, though, I guess. You have to have that leap of faith.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to have that leap of faith, indeed. And maybe I wouldn't speak to myself 3 years ago, but more like 5 or 6 years ago, and say like, reduce your workload if you want to start the company. It's not going to work to do it by nights or weekends. Like, you need to rest as well. And I would say more recently, the thing in the last few months that I've been reflecting, where I have doubted my entrepreneurial instincts, if you will, is more this like extreme diversification. Because it comes with lots of responsibilities as well, but also little time to improve each of them.
Yes.
If you're 9 people who only use Excel, for something, or Power BI, then you get really, really good at it. But if you're using 12 tools and you're delivering 15 things, and you say, "Oh, this thing wasn't so great," well, too late. Let's go to the next thing, and we're just delivering this again 9 months from now, and we haven't had time as much to improve. So I don't have really a strong conclusion on this, but I would probably warn myself a few years ago to say, like, are you sure? Like, because I have, as I said, I have this vision of what information design can do, but it's different from what Voila can do.
Of course, yeah.
Until Voila can cover this entire vision, and not to grow too fast either.
Yeah, I think that they're really important summary points. And I think, again, what strikes me from our last hour of chatting is it seems to me that you've got this perfect balance of both a vision for what this thing can be, should be, and what role you can play in that field and that delivery service. But also you've got this, constant radar of, let's just kind of keep this house of cards balanced and carefully poised and fit for purpose. And if we grow, we grow, but we'll just kind of go with it and find the solution that follows. So
I want to say one thing about this is that, I was kind of referring to people who do information design but do not learn it, or do data visualization and do not learn it. I would turn this inwards to myself and say that I tend to do entrepreneurship and not necessarily to learn it. There are a lot of books about how to manage, a lot of trainings that I do not attend. Like I read a few things. I have a business mentor. I also have sort of an advisor for it, and we have discussions. But I wish that I would get more into the theory of entrepreneurship, and really think at a higher level, what at the theoretical level, almost what is happening. So it's not perfect at all.
Not perfect, but good enough for now. Absolutely. Well, listen, Francis, thank you so much. Been really fascinating and rewarding to learn about your journey and the journey of Voila. And I wish you all the continued success going forward, to you and the staff, as of today and as of the future. So thank you for sharing your time, and thank you everyone out there for listening and tuning in and watching this episode, and see you again soon for let's imagine episode 1 of season 4 in the future. Take care. Thank you very much. To see more information about today's episode, including some links to key sites and resources mentioned, please visit my website at visualizingdata.com. Here you'll also be able to find details about my book, information about my public and private training courses, as well as over a decade of blog posts. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking, subscribing, and spreading the word. See you next time.